Welcome, dear readers. You're listening to Time to Read, a Winnipeg Public Library podcast book club. We're recording today from Millennium Library in Winnipeg, which is within Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ininew, and Dakota peoples, and in the National Homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. In this episode, we will be discussing The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I'm Dennis, Lorist Idea Mill, and I'm not sure my Sesapine is working properly. Across the table from me is...
I'm Toby. I'm an outreach librarian based out of here at Millennium Library, and a thruple was not on my bingo card for this one. And across the table from me is...
Hi, I'm Trevor from the Louis Riel Library, and before I read this book, I thought the only fifth season, at least in Winnipeg, was construction season.
A good book can carry me away from an ever-urgent, ordinary day, yeah. So keep it down, leave me alone, close the doors and turn off the phone, 'cause all I ever really need is a little more time to read.
And you, dear readers, we wouldn't do this without you. Got any important bits of stone lore you'd like to share with us? Send us an email. You can find our email address and all our social media outlets by going to wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca and scrolling to the bottom of the page. Hang around till the end of the episode to enjoy our most cherished segment, Nerd Words for Word Nerds. Plus, it's that special time of year where we talk about our reading resolutions. Before we proceed further, let's check in with the panel. How are you guys doing?
Well, Happy New Year to you both. This episode will be first available on January 3rd, I guess.
Yeah.
So here we are in 2025. We're recording it slightly before that.
Yes, as time travelers, as we often do.
Right.
Yeah.
It's nice to be back in person with you two.
Yes, we are glad to have all of us in the same room together again, because Toby can walk now.
Hooray!
Yeah, it's great. I mean, for the casual listener, you may not even have realized that we were at different places because of Dennis's mastery with the editing, but we were not in the same room, the three of us, since the summer, I think.
Yeah.
So it is good.
Yeah, and last month I unfortunately had to miss because I got COVID, and I was really disappointed because it was a good book, and I was looking forward to discussing it with you guys.
I know. I've been keeping an eye out to see if the movie's going to play here. I feel like it might be one of those movies that plays for like a week or a weekend. I haven't seen it, but if it's coming, I will definitely put the word out.
That I would look forward to.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so we are going to proceed then, and Toby's going to tell us about the author, after which Trevor will give us a summary of the book.
Okay, N.K. Jemisin. Nora Keta Jemisin was born on September 19th, 1972 in Iowa City while her parents were completing master's programs at the University of Iowa. When she was 1, the family moved to New York City where her dad taught art and her mom taught grade school science. When she was 5, her parents divorced and she went to live with her mother in Mobile, Alabama, a hotbed of racism. Jemisin hated it. When she was in the 4th grade, the Ku Klux Klan burned a cross on the courthouse lawn and then lynched a black teenager as he walked home from the store. From a young age, science fiction appealed to her. She saw Star Wars when it first came out and mined her local library for science fiction novels, though almost never encountered characters or authors who looked like her. She started writing, though believing that a career writing fantasy was unavailable to her, she pursued other things. She ended up going to Tulane University, where she received a BS in psychology in 1994, and 3 years later she earned a master's from the University of Maryland. She worked as a career counselor at various colleges in Massachusetts while writing anonymous online fan fiction. Unhappy in her career, she began to take writing more seriously in her late 20s and early 30s. She attended a writing workshop, joined a writing group, and wrote short stories to hone her craft. Her first short story was published in 2004. Her debut novel, The 100,000 Kingdoms, was published in 2010 and was nominated for the Hugo, Nebula, and Locus Awards. 2 other books in the same series followed within 18 months of the first. The 5th season was published in 2015, the first of the Broken Earth trilogy. It won the Hugo for Best Novel, making Jemisin the first African-American writer to win a Hugo in that category. The 2 other books in the series, The Obelisk Gate and The Stone Sky, also won Hugos, making Jemisin the first author to win the Hugo Award for the Best Novel in 3 consecutive years, as well as the first to win for all 3 novels in a trilogy. In 2017, she published a short story collection, How Long Till Black Future Month. Her urban fantasy, The City We Became, was published in 2020, and its sequel, The World We Make, was published in 2022. She received the MacArthur Genius Grant in 2020. And in her spare time, she's into tabletop and video games, biking, fan fiction, and urban gardening. She lives in Brooklyn with her son and 2 cats.
Nice.
Right. So the 5th season, as Toby mentioned, it's the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy. It's set in a world periodically ravaged by catastrophic seismic events called 5th seasons. The world is made up of one supercontinent that is referred to as the Stillness, which incidentally I think would make a good band name. The story follows Esun, an origine. An origine is someone who can control and cause seismic activity, whose life is shattered when her husband brutally murders their young son and then flees with their daughter Esun. As Esun embarks on a perilous journey to find her daughter, she navigates a society that fears and oppresses origines, who are both revered and persecuted for their dangerous abilities. We also get alternating chapters that focus on Damea, a young feral origin, one who was not brought up in the system, who was given over to the Fulcrum, which is the organization that trains origins for the state, to be trained as a state-sanctioned origin. So we follow Damea's story, and then also Cyanite, who is a young origin who graduated from the Fulcrum and who is already a 4th ring origin. Every origin through the Fulcrum process gets another ring when they move up through the ranks, kind of like different belts in a martial art. Cyanite is paired with a senior origin named Alabaster, and they're sent on a mission to a coastal community, or CALM, as the communities are referred to in this world, to assist with the clearing of their harbor. I should mention also that Cyanite and Alabaster have been tasked with producing a child that will be the property of the Fulcrum, using the lovely term breeders. And if this child exhibits orogenic qualities, they will be taken into the system. And we'll discuss maybe what happens to these children if they show any potential. It's horrific. And if they don't show potential, then they enter the guardian stream, which we're going to get into all this, I guess, which is another type of person in this whole world. So anyway, we get to interweave Esun's personal struggle with a broader exploration of the world's fragile existence and the devastating consequences of its seismic instability. Through complex world building, Jemison delves into themes of survival, power, and societal inequality. Yeah, I almost just really went off on a tangent about trying to explain things I only partially understand.
Which there's a lot of in this book, a lot of things to cover. So how do you guys find it?
I really liked this book. It took me a while to get into. There's basically no exposition. So for the first, 50, 80 pages, it was very slow going. I was very confused. I kept flipping to the appendix to figure out what certain words meant. But once I got oriented to this world, I was in it. I just found it so compelling, so fascinating. The world building is so interesting. I think the characters are super rich. There were points that were so exciting, I didn't want to put it down. I dug it.
Well, the first impression I had is, with a lot of fantasy books, is that it opens with a map of the area. Now, you guys know me. I love maps. But did you guys notice how useless this map is in the front? Like, I don't know how you guys feel about maps in fantasy stories, but some people love them, some people hate them. The haters hate them because they feel like it somehow will telegraph what the story is, right? Like if there are 3 cities on the map, you just know the characters are going to visit those 3 cities in the adventure or whatever. Not the case in this. This map does not have half the cities or towns on it. I can't tell you how many times I would flip back to the beginning of the map to try to figure out where these characters were, only to find out that there's no way of knowing, except for the very, very general way, okay, they're in the south latitudes or something. So, that's just a little pet peeve of mine that I do like a map. I'm thinking the author must have had she must have signed off on this map. So it must be intentionally vague for a reason. And the only thing I can think is that, like Toby was saying, we're just dropped into this world without any type of exposition. And the map is the same way. This map is maybe meant to be a map for the people that live in the stillness, who will know these are the cities, and they know these little cities are between these big cities, and that's fine. So me being a human from this time Earth, the map's not for me. It's for the people that might be in the story, but it's still a little frustrating. But yeah, I mean, again, the world building, she doesn't make it easy. She doesn't handhold the audience at all. You're introduced to all of these ideas, these concepts that are kind of borderline magic, but they're also pseudoscience-y because it talks about tectonic plates and earth powers and things. But yeah, the very first kind of scene that we're brought into is a woman who comes across her child that has been murdered.
No, there's a scene before that.
Oh, okay. Okay, yes.
Yeah.
The very first chapter is sort of like, well, let's start with the end of the world. Like, it's kind of a cavalier. But okay. Let me just rephrase what I said. The first concrete scene that sticks with the reader is a scene of a mother discovering her murdered child. Now, if that isn't the most devastating, bleak image to begin a book, then you also find out that he's murdered by the child's father, this character's husband. And she suspects that he's also taken their other child, a daughter, and fled. And that's kind of where we start. Mm-hmm. It's I don't know how it was a very powerful, very searing image that I feel like had the power to carry this character throughout the whole book. And it does. Like, this character is driven to find her daughter and to exact revenge. And everything else that kind of happens is built kind of along that spine, I think. So like Toby said, just like Toby, I enjoyed this book. Eventually, once I kind of got into the idea of what this was all about, and then being okay with not knowing every last thing that's going on, which was kind of hard to kind of just go with, but I knew that I wasn't going to get answers, so I'm either going to have to just plow ahead and see what I make of it, or give up, and giving up wasn't an option. So yeah, and then we talked about it. We get a nice segue with an island full of sex-starved pirates. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead. What did you think, Dennis? How did you find it?
One thing I often find with epic or very big sci-fi and fantasy is when there's so much world building, it can be very hard to get into at the beginning. And usually the first couple of chapters are the thing that drive me away or keep me in it. I was very grateful that she started out the way she did with, so let's just start with the end of the world and get that out of the way. And her first couple of paragraphs were so, different than I expected for that when it did start getting heavier into the world building stuff, and as you've said, she doesn't explain any of the things. She just uses the language and figures you'll pick it up as you go. But I was willing to keep going because of the way she started. Because I could see she could write light and clear if she wanted to, and that it would probably get back to that when she'd established things. I was thinking as opposed to the Left Hand of Darkness, where at the beginning it was very dense and it took a long time to get into it. So that was good. And yeah, the depths in this book are there are so many things that we can talk about today, because the world is rich, the characters are rich, the storyline was rich. Spoiler warnings, we are going to get into some stuff that is going to reveal some things in this book, because I don't see any other way to talk about it.
I want to know, so Trevor and I knew the twist before it came in the book.
Okay.
We both found out independently of each other.
Yeah, we were spoiled.
And so I was curious about your reading experience of it. If you figured it out before. So do we need to talk about what we're talking about?
So I would say by the end of the book, something is revealed. If you don't want to know what that is, maybe stop listening now. But we've never made any type of attempt to not be spoilers.
Yes,
no,
yes.
But I do want to, we do want to be conscientious. So if you don't want to have anything spoiled, stop now and just know that we've all recommended this book highly already. And I think that's just going to be our verdict at the end, is that you should go read this because it's really good.
But the spoiler did not ruin it for me. So
same.
Okay, well, that's really good because so the spoiler is all three characters that we are following through this book are the same character at different points in their life. First off, I read an ebook version. It did not have a map at the front, and I didn't realize that there was an appendix at the end until I got to the end of the book. So I was going in just with the text, and I would say I was about halfway through the book when in one of the storylines she was saying it's not like they were in a season. And that's the moment I'm like, oh crap, I had thought that these were contemporaneous accounts, that these were different characters at the same time. And it didn't click with me that two of the storylines weren't showing any indication that there was a disaster happening. When she said that, I suddenly realized, wait, these are not in time. And I had started recognizing the connection between, is it Deanna?
Demaya.
Demaya and Cyanite. And I realized this just before Damaya said that she had a new name and that it was Cyanite. So it was just before that that it clicked. And then I realized if they're the same character, then that's probably a Soon. That would make sense. And so when it got to the end and they're like, connecting the dots at the end of the book, because she doesn't leave you hanging the whole time. She does tell you. But by the time we got there, I had already figured that part out. And I was delighted by the discovery. It wasn't one of those things where I felt ripped off or confused by it or anything like that. I just hadn't made certain logical connections at the beginning about the way the story was playing out. So for me, it was a discovery. And I really liked it. It made sense. Each of the stories I felt were compelling on their own. Mm-hmm. They were interesting characters to follow and to see what was happening with them anyway. But to realize that they were the same person was like, wow, it just kind of expanded the impact of all the different things that have happened to her over the course of the story.
Yeah, I think the reason for me why it was spoiled was because, like I was saying, I was 30, 40, 50 pages into the book, and I was having a real tough go of it where I couldn't quite get my footing. So I thought, well, maybe if I go and read a quick little summary, then I'll get the big picture and I'll come back and then, I got the big picture and something extra. And as soon as I read it, I was like, well, shit, because I feel like now it's like, I can't unsee that. But like Toby said, it didn't, if anything, it kind of enhanced the story because I could kind of then see how these threads are going to tie together before they're actually tied. And she, throws tiny little hints throughout, which I was able to appreciate more. And it was an interesting little magic trick she pulled off, but it's not, the whole book isn't the trick. And if that was it, then it would be a bit of a disappointment, but it just kind of adds to the story. It's more of a trick with the structure that when it comes to the end, you're like, but there's so much more going on in this book that having that spoiled will not, I don't think, if it didn't take away from it for you.
No. And I, like you said, I think it added because I could see this character in different points of her journey. And it was kind of easy to see how Damaya became Cyanite, but I had no idea how Cyanite became Soon. And so even though I knew they were the same character, I didn't know what the journey was to get there.
Yeah, that was a harder leap because, when someone graduates from the Fulcrum, they take another name.
Yeah.
But how does she get that third name? And what happens between her when she's Cyanite to Soon? That's the gap that...
Yeah, so the other thing about when I made that realization about halfway through the book, the first thing I did was I went back to the prologue and read that over again because I'm like, if I'm making this connection right now, I bet there's something in the prologue that I'll understand better now. And that's when, I'm reading through it. Because at the beginning, there's described as a man standing on a hill.
With a stone eater.
Who breaks the earth and causes the catastrophe that is then kind of the dividing line of the novel. And that's when I realized, well, that's Alabaster. Mm-hmm. That's got to be Alabaster. Who else could do this that we have been introduced to at all? There's no one else. It has to be Alabaster. And he's with a stone eater. And by that time, we'd already been introduced to the stone eater in there. And so it's just like, connections just boom in my head, and it's like, okay, all right. But I want to know how he got to that point now, and that builds up further in the novel too. So every little realization I made just made it more interesting.
Yeah, it's a very tight novel, like all the lines, all the plots, all the narratives, all the characters, they're very closely plotted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and having said that, there are lots of characters. Like at the beginning, it feels like tons of strands, and you think these are not going to ever come together, yet they do. Mm-hmm. And you can kind of plot a course for each of those characters, and it all does come together in a really cool way. In some ways, I almost wish this was a standalone book because there'd be kind of a satisfactory end to knowing that. And the fact knowing that this was one of three maybe takes away a little bit of that structure because, okay, that's kind of a nice, perfect way to wrap it all up. And yet, it's kind of cliffhangery in a way because we go on with Alabaster saying, have you heard about a moon?
Yeah, that closing line.
Yeah, that I had to put the second book on hold. I was like, what are they going to do with the moon?
Yeah.
Well, there's the thing I'm assuming, and Trevor knows because he's already read the second book.
I'll tell you this. The second book is called The Obelisk Gate. I still don't know what an obelisk gate is.
Yeah, but I'm assuming she won't be able to do the same structure thing she did with this one with the 3 stories that end up being one story.
Correct.
I'm assuming.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to seeing how she tackles that one because the structure was part of what was interesting in this first novel, but just a part of it. I'm curious to see how that aspect is handled in the subsequent novels.
Well, this isn't a spoiler except to say that in the second book, we may see some events we've already seen, but from different points of view.
Good.
Different characters that maybe we haven't seen yet.
Okay.
That have been talked about. But even I don't know how the whole series ends because I've only just started the third book. So I'm not the ultimate authority. So I have just as many questions, I'm sure, as you guys. I might be a little further down the road, but I'm still in the dark.
Yeah, and there were so many questions in this book. Like, first, you're just learning about the world and, like, these characters, and they have this special organ in their brain that lets them feel tectonic activity. Even non-origins, they have this. They can feel it. So you're learning about that, and you're learning about how cataclysmic life is on this planet, constantly trying to kill the populace. And then there's all these characters, and you're trying to figure out where they play in. Like, at one point, as soon as traveling, she meets a young boy named Hoa. And he's weird, and he's different. And she's she's just kind of rolling with it. Even when it's revealed that Hoa is a stone eater, we don't know why exactly he's following her, why he's spending time with her. Like, the Stone Eaters are this whole thing with the character. It's introduced right at the beginning, in the prologue. There's a Stone Eater, and you don't learn much about them throughout the book. They are very mysterious.
And even if you go to the glossary at the end, it says Stone Eaters are a mysterious a group that no one knows much about. Thanks a lot, NK.
Yeah, but it's like, but they're central. Like, they're clearly central to what's going on right there because they were right there at the beginning when Alabaster broke the world and apparently approve of it.
Right. But is that the beginning or is that the end?
Ooh.
Right. Ooh. Why are they doing this?
I read or heard something about how when Jemison was writing this book and creating the Stone Eaters, she wanted to write like a mythological creature that we had no prototype for. You know, she didn't want like a centaur or like a mermaid or, you know, like just something totally new and original. And she definitely did that. And we can infer quite a bit about the Stone Eaters. We know, you know, they have a connection with the origins. They come from the obelisks. They eat stone. They look like stone. They can turn things into stone.
We don't know that they come from obelisks.
Well, the one trapped in the obelisk.
There's one trapped there, but we don't know why. And it appeared to be dead.
Well, they have some connection with the obelisks. I mean, Hoa comes out of an obelisk at the beginning.
He comes out of something.
It's an obelisk.
Well, it's kind of a geode thing,
so?
Isn't it?
Yeah.
They didn't say that it was an obelisk.
I guess.
The obelisks are huge, though.
Yeah, that's right. They would notice if it was...
Yeah, this was small. It was about the size of a person.
Yeah.
It sounded almost like it was an egg.
See, these are the questions I have for you, Trevor. I mean, the second book. Tell us about the Stone Eaters.
I'll tell you anything you want. Just don't ask about the obelisk. Just don't ask about the gate.
No spoiling the second book.
Honestly, I don't think I could spoil it if I wanted to because she likes to hide the ball, right? You know, she is not straightforward. The author, I mean.
Yeah.
And so even though, like I say, I'm a little further down the road, it's still a very windy road. So I don't think I can tell you a couple of plot points that happened, which I'm not going to, but... so
the mystery continues.
The mystery continues, the nature of the Stone Eaters and what they're all about. The way they were described is very unsettling. The way that they talk, but their faces don't move. The only thing I could think of at the time was, remember that crazy orgy scene in Eyes Wide Shut where Tom Cruise is wearing the mask? They're all wearing masks, but when they're talking, it's this very kind of unsettling thing because you see this face that might have a huge grin on it, but you just hear a voice that's coming from it. So I'm thinking, I mean, that's where my mind went to when I thought of the Stone Eaters. They were like these masks. They weren't.
I liked that bit where it talks about how they tried to capture a stone eater at one point to study it, and then, you know, we're still recovering in 100 years from whatever happened.
Yeah, so they just decided, we just won't do anything with them at all.
Yeah, like
let them do what they
they're
want.
So powerful, but how? No one knows. No one knows.
And there's, and I wouldn't call this a light book by any stretch, but there are moments in it where she's almost doing parodies of other books, right? Because you've got or tropes of other stories, like you have Cyanite being forced to be with Alabaster, and they hate each other, and it's almost like the classic rom-com. These two people, they hate each other, they're going to come to understand each other. It doesn't go that way, but it kind of is set up that way. These two people hate each other, then they fall in love, blah, blah, blah. And then also, like, when Damaya is in the school, and then she meets that popular kid who gives all of the, this is like a teen comedy where, you're the unpopular kid, but then there's a makeover and all that. And it doesn't go that way at all either. That character just drops out of the book. But I think it's kind of interesting that she sets up these scenarios and then kind of dismisses them. Is like, no, this isn't that kind of book. But
what that reminds me of too is that, like, aside from the really good characterization of all the characters, the relationships between them are super, I'm going to say realistic, even though it's a fantasy with like stone eaters and people who can control earthquakes. But the relationships feel realistic, and the interactions that these characters have with each other is just, it's compelling and not, it doesn't follow easy tropes. It's really good.
Even the language, like, you feel like it's evolved from English because rust has become synonymous with a curse word, but it doesn't replace curse words. Like they still will say curse words, but they also like, so when everyone says, "Oh, you rusting son of a whatever," it's a swear, but then they'll also, like, a really bad swear will include rust and other actual swear words and stuff. It's just kind of an interesting, like, the way a language might evolve, without any explanation.
Yeah, so one of the central things about this book is origins and their relationship to society at large. And this is one of those things that had me thinking the whole time through the book. Like, at the beginning, you have Essun there, and it's not clear that she's a trained origin at the beginning. From what you're reading, she could be just a wild or, a feral origin that has a little bit better control. And you see that no one trusts them. It's like the village, like, you find them, you kill them. Demea is almost killed by her family, but then, like, sent off. Like, there's this disgust and fear of them. And I'm reading that and thinking, well, this is a world where everything is geologically unstable. Wouldn't you want to have them on your side? It seems like, because, Essun managed to still that earthquake sweeping through her village, barely trying. And I'm like, wouldn't you want them on your side? And then you read, there's the fulcrum. It's like, okay, so they do get them on your side, except it's like through torture and intimidation and threats, because the Guardians, who we haven't talked about much, have an ability to neutralize the origins, and so they can neutralize them and kill them. And so they keep the origins in line, and you're like, well, okay, but, like, wouldn't you want them on your side? Like, because they have an interest in the world being stable too. Wouldn't that? And then towards the end, we get to the pirate island, and there they did just that. They integrated, they accept them, they welcome them, they put them in leadership positions because of their abilities. And it's like, okay, that makes much more sense, right? Except it's only like a small outlying community that does this. Everything else is like the control of everything. And when there isn't that control, the hatred and the fear and the we're going to kill you fast kind of situation. And obviously it's an analog for racism and oppression of any kind, just kind of, writ large in that beautiful fantasy way of you make it a little different so that the story can get through any filters you have. I found that aspect very compelling throughout this book.
Is that also a good segue to talk about the pirate island?
You want to get to the pirate island?
Who doesn't want to get to the pirate island?
Yeah.
It's a utopia.
The pirate island really literally came out of nowhere because at one minute they are in a very bad situation where a guardian is about to kill them on the shoreline of Aaliyah. And before we know it, a bunch of lights and things happen. And our main character at that moment, Cyanite, is on a bluff at the top of a hill on an island.
Yeah. And
where does it go from there, Toby?
Well, there's a handsome ruler named Inon, and Inon, Alabaster, and Cyanite have a lovely relationship together.
Yes.
They sure do.
And that was a nice relationship.
It was.
Wasn't it?
It was really nice. I really thought they could make it work. They could really be happy together. I wanted Cyanite to have one of Inon's children, for them all to live happily ever after. Cyanite just was restless. She wanted more from life.
And I was thinking, I was reading this, like, this is the part of the book that she's super clear on and gives lots of detail. Like, up to this point, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I'm like, no, I definitely know in full detail the sex life of these three characters.
The phrase "oily cock" really stands out to me in that bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes you just need a sex-starved bisexual pirate to enter your life.
And there was something about that character who was very sexy. Like, I don't quite know what it was about him, but as we were talking before, he had a real, like, Dwayne Johnson energy.
Well, he definitely, everyone loved him. Like, when the ship would come in, everyone would run to the ship and he would regale them with stories and, like, Yeah, he was. Even though he wasn't the political leader of the island, but he was the spiritual leader, right? Wasn't there some other guy that was like, or the lead origin, or
yeah, there was someone else who was technically in charge.
Yeah,
but he was.
But Einon was the guy. Like he was the guy holding it together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was the one you would follow if there was actual trouble.
Yeah.
I think that partly what was appealing about him as a character is just he was happy.
Yes.
He was kind and generous. Mm-hmm. You know, he looked out for the people around him, and they were having this sexual relationship, and he was very open about being interested in them. But also wasn't forcing it. It was just like very much like, hey, I'm into you. I'm into you. You guys want to come over here? And it's just invitation, respect, kindness, and also he's like 6'6" and full of muscles and big hair, and like
right. Well, and that's the other interesting thing is that like the way that Jemison kind of treats sexuality in this book is that some characters it sort of mentions like Alabaster kind of prefers guys. And it's just sort of like, there's a story about him having a fling with one of the other seniors in the garden at the Fulcrum. But it's just sort of mentioned and left. And then another character is trans, but
very
it's just
casually trans.
Yeah, just very mentions a thing, but, or whatever. And so it's just kind of interesting that she populates the story with characters where the sexuality is very fluid and very normalized, and where you could have a threeple with a pirate, and it didn't seem completely like where's it going. It just seems like, okay, this is how this world is. So I thought it was an interesting way that by not really addressing it, she kind of says it's not a big deal in this world, kind of.
Yeah, and like in terms of racial stuff as well, like a lot of the key characters are black.
Yeah,
but it's not like focusing on that. And there's a lot of talk about like Sanzed ancestry. The Sanzed Empire was like one of the precursors to the existing political situation. And they were noted for being very tall and robust and
ash blow hair,
and things like that. And so there's often references to how much Sanzed a person appeared to have in his or her history. So there was stuff like that in it, but it wasn't. One thing I found interesting about this book is, like in a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff or, fantasy stuff, there's a lot of war and conflict going on. But the history that we get from this world, we don't actually hear a lot about that. Like, we know that there was empire building at some point in the past. And we know during a season, every community is kind of like locked down because, limited resources. And so they may fight each other off. But there's not a lot of talk about politics beyond that. I thought maybe, it's because in a world like this, it's the environment itself that is so much of a threat that's what you have to battle. Also, a small language note, I found we often refer to Earth as Mother Earth. But in this book, it was Father Earth. And Father Earth was a very angry father who was trying to kill you.
Watch out for that season of the teeth.
Yeah.
Yes. But that linguistic thing I found interesting, the fact that it would be Father Earth instead of Mother Earth. And
well, Jemison's probably a feminist, so she couldn't imagine Mother Earth being so hostile.
And it also fits in with Esun's husband killing his child. Angry fathers. Mm-hmm. Angry fathers.
But a lot of child abuse generally in this book, huh? Like,
oh God, yeah.
I mean, another big spoiler, but like the scene where Cyanide kills her son, that really got to me.
Yes, that
was... And the node station,
yeah, when they go off the main highway to visit the node station, and you realize that these nodes, which are set up to help keep tremors to a minimum, are actually powered by origin children that have been lobotomized so that they don't have the ability to fight back, and they're just using their powers, and they're in these weird little like wire chairs. I just imagine like a totally like an H.R. Giger, that artist that did the stuff for Alien, like that kind of situation where there's all these wires and things, and this poor little pale child who coincidentally or not probably was Alabaster's biological child, because he fathered several of these children that had orogenic properties that were then snatched away. And do you think? Yeah, he knew, right? Like he kind of wanted to show. He wanted to show Cyanide that we should visit a node because he knew. Like he was. I mean, it's still horrifying, but he wanted her to see, right?
Yeah. Alabaster was, again, I mean, every character was interesting, but Alabaster Like, at one point, Cyanite realizes that Alabaster is using his own abilities to quiet the tremors in the area, even though they're near a node, and so he doesn't have to. And she can't understand why he's wasting his energy when he doesn't need to be. And he's like, well, I'm trying to take as much work off of the nodes as I can. And then when he shows her the nodes, then she can understand why. It's because those are his children, practically. And to kind of think about the depth of pain that he is feeling throughout everything. Like, he's super powerful, but he knows what they can do to him if they send the Guardians after him. And he knows what they do to his kids and what they do to any origin that steps out of line or isn't fulfilling whatever they want. And he has to put up with this, because he can't see a way out until he finally takes the big step that is right at the beginning of the book and destroys the planet as thoroughly as possible, creating a 5th season that they says right at the beginning of the book will be thousands of years, which is, the worst one ever in the history of this world. But you really see why. This is a man who has been pushed so far, who has had so much suffering that he has had to hold up, and the fact that he's forced to father children, even though he doesn't want particularly to have sex with women, and then to know what they do with his kids, and then to feel powerless to prevent it. Man, it's
a lot. And I mean, it's everywhere. Even like the Maya getting her hand broken by the Guardian. Like, it's so, there's a lot.
Yeah. This is a deep, deep book. We could probably keep talking about this, but I'm looking at the clock and realizing we should probably start wrapping up. So are there things you want to talk about that you want to get in before we move to the next segment?
The only thing I was going to mention was when you were talking about the island being this sort of Eden, and that was sort of in the Cyanite era. And then they come across another kind of idyllic calm, which was Castrima in the Essoon one, which was this really cool geode underground that would only work, like all the HVAC, if you will, would work if an origin was present. So it was useless to anyone that didn't have orogenic tendencies. And that was another community where origins and stills, the word used for people that aren't sensitive to it, were living, maybe in harmony is too optimistic, but at least they had developed feral origins that were living side by stills. And it was a world that we get to learn more about in the second book, but we're just kind of introduced to it at the end of the first book. And it's another kind of example of how a free world could work outside of the reach of the Fulcrum.
But it's not totally idyllic there, right? Like, there's something sinister going on.
It's hard to tell, right? But it's you get an unsettled feeling there. Yeah,
like Assoon isn't allowed to leave. Isn't that what happens? Or she
there is the idea that people who origins are drawn to this place, right? Like they feel. In fact, that's why Hoa thought that Assoon's daughter would be there, because he sensed that that's where she was going. She was being drawn to it. And of course, when she gets there, her daughter isn't there. We find out, but there is a power there that might not be fully explained. I mean, the fact that origins and stills are able to live together,
and stone eaters.
And stone eaters living underground in this kind of cool place is just another kind of cool world. Just to say that there's other things in this book we haven't even touched on that are really cool and worth talking about.
Yeah, if we've spoiled a lot of the story, don't worry. There's so much in this book that you will still find new interesting things that we haven't even mentioned yet. Did you have any other stuff you wanted to?
No. I was surprised by how much I liked it. I'm excited to keep going.
Yeah. So there you have it. Our recommendation is read this book if you haven't already. And if you have, let us know what you liked about it most. We heartily endorse this book and encourage you to read it. Probably all the other ones in it as well.
Yeah. And having said that, though, if you start it, you can't get into it, that's okay too, because I think it's not for everyone.
No, true. Not every book is for every person. My boss is a very heavy fantasy reader, reads a lot of the stuff, and she has tried a couple of times to read this one and just hasn't been able to get over that initial hump.
I think if I hadn't been, quote unquote, forced to read this book for the podcast, I might not have made it past, 50, 80 pages.
Yeah.
But it really rewards you for pushing through.
If you get past, let's say, 4 chapters, I don't know, something like that.
It's like getting through the rocky bits at a beach to get to the sandbar.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And once you're over that hump, it pays off really, really well. Okay. So with that said, normally we would go to our segment, Can You Tell Me a Book I Would Also Like? But not this month. This episode goes out at the beginning of January, and we've made it a tradition to talk about our reading resolutions as we go into the new year. I guess we'll each talk about our reading resolutions from last year and how we fared, and then talk about our new reading resolutions.
Looking back to last year, my reading resolution for 2024 was to read as many found books in the past year as I could. So I defined a found book as something that I didn't go out of my way to buy, but I found in mostly my house. And so actually, weirdly enough, because I was kind of OCD about this, I kept a list of the found books that I found and read. And I thought I would just read them out quickly and, see if there's any comments. So there don't have to be comments, but if there are, first of all, the Bible, because I know my mom is listening. The New Revised Standard Version. Yeah.
The whole thing?
Not the whole thing.
Had you not read it before?
I dipped into it.
Okay.
As one does over the year. Mm-hmm. Theodore Roosevelt, A Life by Nathan Miller. I have no idea why that book was in my basement. And truth be told, I read about 25% of it. The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin. So delighted I had a copy, and we did it on the podcast. Also, Bel Canto by Anne Patchett. So that was 2 for 2. And Agatha Christie, Murder in the Links. Murder on the Golf Course. Delightful. A book, this is maybe the weirdest one. It was called Crows, Encounters with the Wise Guys of the Avian World by Candace Savage. Stories about crows. And then I just did selections. Selections from The Complete Sherlock Holmes, selections from P.G. Wodehouse, selections from Tintin by Hergé, controversial, selections from my newly repatriated comic book collection from my mom's basement. So I think I did okay.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah. How about you, Toby? How'd you make out?
I made out pretty well. My reading resolution for 2024 was to reread. And I did reread. I don't know how many books I reread, but maybe it was about half a dozen. And it ended up being a really good experience. I had a kind of a rough start to the year reading-wise. I was just reading mediocre book after mediocre book, and I started to really doubt my ability to choose books for myself. And so this was a great time to reread because I was rereading books that I had previously loved in the past. And it kind of refreshed me and made me optimistic about books again. And it really solidified some books as all-time favorites. I reread Circe and I reread Station 11, which are now, I would confidently say, 2 of my favorite books. Some books were not as good as I remembered, and I will not name them. But yeah, it was a really good experience, and I look forward to doing more rereading.
Excellent. My resolution this past year was to read more comedy. Been a rough couple of years, and I wanted things that made me feel good. So I read a few books that are, I will call fun. They're not necessarily strictly comedy, but they had fun concepts. They had light aspects to them. They were, I will say, zany. I read Hench by Natalie Zeno Walschatz, which I love the concept of this one. There's been a lot of re-examination of superheroes in the last 20 years, right? And this one question is, what if working as a hench person for a supervillain was a job kind of like any office job where you would sign up at an agency, and lead character in this book was doing bookkeeping and stuff for for various villains and things until she is seriously injured when a superhero breaks into the facility of one particular villain and causes a lot of damage. And in the aftermath of that, she starts using her ability to use spreadsheets really well to start causing some interesting things to happen. And anyway, it was a fun concept. It was a really good story. It was one that followed the villains very much, and just really enjoyed that one. And I also read 2 books by Jason Pargin, who is also published under the name David Wong. John Dies at the End is maybe the one that's most well known. It's like a horror comedy thing in the vein of Evil Dead. I can't really describe that one terribly well. It was wacky and off the wall in every direction, but it was a lot of fun. And then Futuristic Violence and Fancy Suits, which is a near future type of thing in a world where there's a city, which is a mega city and essentially has become its own lawless paradise. This young woman who's growing up in a trailer park ends up having to go there because her father, who she hasn't seen most of her life, turned out to be a major criminal mastermind. And she has inherited his estate because he's been killed. And now she's in this world where there are people trying to kill her, and they have superpowers now, and no one knows how that has started. And anyways, it was wild and fun, and so I had a blast. Yeah, those were fun. I'm going to read more like that as I continue.
A couple of those books on your list sound like something that's going to be in my reading resolutions for this next year. So for 2025, like we mentioned on the podcast, we don't read a lot of fantasy on the podcast, and I don't read a lot in my own personal reading. So my reading goal for 2025 is to read as many of, and hopefully all of, the 2024 Hugo shortlist finalists. So there are 6 titles, and 3 of them are by authors I've heard of and have read, and 3 are by authors I've never heard of. So it's a good balance. So we've got The Adventures of Amina El-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty, The Saint of Bright Doors by Vajra Chandrasekhara, Some Desperate Glory by Emily Tesh. This is the one that made me think of you, Dennis. Is Starter Villain by John Scalzi.
I want to read that book too. Yeah.
Translation State by Anne Leckie, another one that you like.
Yeah.
And a favorite of ours on the podcast, Martha Wells. But it's not part of the Murder Bot. It's a different series called Witch King.
Yeah.
So I haven't read any of them. The library has all of them. We'll see next year how far I get.
Are those all fantasy, or are they all fantasy and sci-fi?
Well, I think the Hugo is fantasy and sci-fi.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
My reading resolution for 2025 seems very insignificant and puny, but it is to listen to an audiobook. I've been very resistant to the format. I have this idea that it's not for me. I feel like it's going to be hard for me to pay attention, to keep track of what's going on. It just doesn't seem like something I would enjoy. But a lot of people I know really enjoy reading audiobooks or listening to audiobooks, and it's a way I can consume even more books. So I'm gonna give it a shot this year.
It is a different experience, but
if
you haven't done it before, you might like it a lot.
Yeah, I just feel like even when I'm listening to a podcast, my mind wanders and I have trouble paying attention.
That is the one danger. Yeah.
So
don't do the thing where you're listeting to it as you go to sleep, because then I always fall asleep and then I don't remember where I was.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go for a romance. Something like light and easy.
Yeah.
See, what my one bit of advice would have been, I mean, of course, listen to whatever book you want, but if you can find a biography or an autobiography or a memoir read by the person, that's always kind of extra fun too. Like because you get the person's actual voice. But romance would be good too. Some sexy times in the years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my resolution for this new year is inspired by the book we just read, and that is to read a multi-book epic fantasy. And I'm sure you can guess which one that's going to be.
It seems like cheating because we read the first one.
Well, I know. It is kind of cheating. It's just I don't often follow up on trilogies or series anymore. So this is a way to kind of make myself a little accountable to it, because I do want to finish this one because I really enjoyed it. And also I figure at the same time, like years ago when we read Murderbot, I also read Anne Leckie's, I think it was called Ancillary Justice, first book in the Imperial Ratch series, which I really liked, and then I never did read the others. So I'd kind of like to go back, reread that first one, and then read the rest of that series, because the first one was very well done. So I'm kind of targeting 2 series there, so it's not cheating as much. When I was younger, I used to do this all the time. And the biggest one I read, I think, was the Belgeriad series by David Eddings. And this was also, the reason I don't often read them is that I like to read series after they're finished so that I can just read them one after another. I don't like big gaps in between them. And with the Belgeriad, I had to come across the first one at Cornish Library when I was in high school. I was sitting on the shelf. It was massive and thick, and I read through it. And I got to the end, and I'm like, man, I got to get the second one. But then I looked at the publication date and realized it had just come out. There was supposed to be 5 in the series. So then, it took a long time on that, and I didn't like that. So I haven't done it much over the years, but I am going to try to do it for this year.
Are you a Game of Thrones guy, or have you not read it for that reason, that the series isn't complete?
I have not read that one, again, because I haven't been reading long series like that. And because it's still not done. No. I mean, the TV series is done and gone and totally wrecked the interest that a lot of people had in it. But I prefer my series completed. So at least the ones that I'm going to target have been completed. And so now that we've done that, we will move on to our favorite segment, Nerd Words for Word Nerds, where we share words and phrases that have sparked our hearts recently. Who wants to go first?
I can go. Mine comes directly from the 5th season, and it's the word Taurus, which is in this book what the origins create around themselves when they're performing orogeny. In geometry, torus is a surface of revolution generated by revolving a circle in three-dimensional space, one full revolution about an axis that is coplanar with the circle. In other words, it's a donut shape. I'm sure this is a word I've looked up before, but I wasn't sure what it was when I was first reading it, so I did want to look it up. The Latin word for it comes from the Latin for a round, swelling, elevation, protuberance. And also when you Google torus, there is a donut shop in Windsor, Ontario called Torus Donuts. So I don't think I will be looking it up again. I think it's now committed to memory.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my word is also inspired by this month's book. And because this book and the two following all won Hugo Awards, my nerd word is Hugo, as in who the award was named for. So interestingly enough, Hugo Gernsback was among H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, known as one of the fathers of science fiction fantasy. Now, I'm going to bet that most of our listeners have heard of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. I have never heard of Hugo Gernsback. I did a quick look of the library catalog. We have 0 books by him, but I suppose at one time he was considered important enough to have the annual awards given out at the World Science Fiction Society at their annual convention named after him, or took on the name just like an Oscar is named for the Academy Award. But I think we've talked about this on the podcast before. The Hugos have been beset with controversy. Recently, there have been the sad puppy and the rabid puppy controversies, which briefly, between 2013, 2017, there were a group of writers that felt that the awards had gone a little too maybe left-wing, a little too woke. I guess that was before that term woke was really used. So they tried to force a slate of books onto the Hugo finalists that would be more, I don't know what you'd call them, conservative, misogynistic, homophobic. That seemed to kind of peter out, though, in 2017. There was a few years there where things weren't great. But then controversy hit again in 2023 because some of the authors in the books that might have been eligible for the award were deemed ineligible, likely for political reasons, because the convention that year was held in China. And controversy followed the Hugo Awards this year when they discovered widespread voter fraud at the awards that were held in Glasgow, Scotland, where they realized about 10% of the votes that were submitted for one particular finalist were created by bots. They didn't say who that finalist was. The finalist did not win, but would have won if all these votes counted. And there's no evidence that this author had anything to do with it. So again, the Hugo Award beset with controversy and maybe doesn't mean much, but having said that, it doesn't take anything away from N.K. Jemisin winning it 3 years in a row.
Yes.
The Hugos.
I like how the award is named after, like it's his first name, not his last name.
Yeah. It's just so...
It's like
such a nice name.
It's like
Hugo.
Mennonite, there was Menno Simons. Like I like when you name something after a first name.
If I had to say who it was named for, I would have guessed like a Victor Hugo or something. Even though that's not a science fiction fantasy guy, I guess he wrote like The Hunchback or whatever. But I was like, okay, it must be named after Victor Hugo. No. A random guy who at one time
not
was
so
important.
random.
Not so random. No, I mean not random, but a guy who's
just unknown to us currently.
Lost to the mists of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My word this month is something that was passing through my social media feeds recently, and that is kakistocracy, which is defined as a government run by the worst, least qualified, or most unscrupulous citizens. It is derived from 2 Greek words, kakistos, which literally means worst, and kratos, which means rule. So it's a literal meaning of government by the worst people. It was created in the 17th century and has been used many times over the past several hundred years to criticize particular governments. You may have an inkling as to why it was coming up in social media feeds recently due to the American election and the announcements of various candidates for government positions. So yeah, kakistocracy. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this month. Thank you for joining us, dear readers. For our next episode, we're going to read and discuss Rules of Civility by Amor Towles. Set in New York City in 1938, Rules of Civility tells the story of a watershed year in the life of an uncompromising 25-year-old named Katie Content. Armed with little more than a formidable intellect, a bracing wit, and her own brand of cool nerve, Katie embarks on a journey from a Wall Street secretarial pool through the upper echelons of New York society in search of a brighter future. Have comments or book suggestions for us? Send us an email. You You can find all our contact info at the bottom of the page at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca. You can also find all our past episodes there too. If you haven't already, subscribe to Time to Read on your favorite podcasting service. Maybe leave us a review. Tell your book-loving friends about us too. And until next time, make sure you find time to read. If you click it around in your mouth, you will hear it. I know this from experience.
All right, I will try to finish it maybe before I...
you do what you need to do. If your throat is sore...
No, it's not so much sore. It's just I'm trying to prevent a cough. So if I can get this thing all lubed up, just give me a second.
Yeah, lube up that mouth.
Oh, no, this is going to appear at the end, isn't it?
It's not as charming as my cat.
Nothing is. No.